great to see you all here today. I'm excited to share this content with you. It's something that we've been working on for a couple years here at Alcorn, but this is my first actual webinar on this topic about how to get an H-1B for your own startup. So I have lots of details I'm excited to share with you. This is being recorded, so you will have access, but if you want to get your questions answered, then I would urge you to stay with me for the full hour. I have a number of slides that I'll be going through as I can. I will try to take questions throughout, and I will also do my best to leave time at the end for more questions. But great to have you here with me today. So we're going to go ahead and get started, and I'm just going to warn you, I've been a bit sneezing today, but we're gonna go with it. The show must go on. So if I have to mute myself, you'll know what that is. Thanks for bearing with me. But just by way of introduction, my name is Sophie Alcorn. I'm the founder of Alcorn Immigration Law, and you can check out my podcast, the Sophie Alcorn Podcast, available on Spotify, Apple Podcasts. Lately in the spring, I interviewed a lot of people in space tech, which was super interesting, like the intersection of outer space and immigration, both through technology and the law. So that was a really fun series of conversations to have. Lately, I've been turning my attention a little bit more back towards politics and have interviewed some former members of Congress. And yeah, that's every week that you can listen. And I started Alcorn Immigration Law. Oh my God, this is going to be our 9-year anniversary this month. So if you are in the San Francisco Bay Area in September of 2025, do check our newsletter, as I'm hoping to have a 10-year anniversary bash in the Palo Alto area. And when I started the law firm, I didn't know what it would become. I was just hoping that after I had been a stay-at-home mom for several years, that I could still help people being an immigration lawyer, which I had put on pause for a little while. But as we've grown, it's helped me to really embrace this mission, which exists at the heart of the firm, which is to erase borders so people have the freedom to live their dreams. So, you know, I'm a mom, I see kids a lot, and the world should be a place where every person has the chance to self-actualize, do work in their flow state, achieve their highest potential. And so that's what we try to do here at Alcorn Immigration Law. And I'll just warn you, I'm having some issue with the Q&A panel, unfortunately. So I see that I'm getting notifications there, and so that's great. And I think it disturbs my screen sharing when I go to look at that. But I'll be trying to take a break throughout to answer any typed questions in the Q&A panel. Not going to be taking live questions for this one, but definitely you can put your questions in the Q&A panel at any time, and I'll do my best to monitor and track the Q&A panel as we go and answer all of your questions. And I see lots of great questions coming through already, so that's wonderful. The more technical ones are probably going to be something that I need to answer at the end. But do put them in there. And I also need to give you my lawyer disclaimers, which are, this is an educational service only. Whatever information I'm providing is of a general nature. It is not specific individual legal advice geared for your direct situation. If you need legal advice, if you need something to be confidential, then talk to a lawyer in privacy. You have the option in the Q&A panel to list your name as anonymous. So please, I encourage you to do that if you would like, and don't share any, secrets or details that could compromise anything about your situation. We offer consultations at Alcorn Immigration Law, and you're welcome to reach out to us. I'll have all of our contact information at the end. You'll get it with your webinar follow-up materials, but we try to be very available. www.alcorn.law. You can call us anytime. If you reach out to us for a consultation, we're going to request that you complete our questionnaire. And I have 4 excellent attorneys who work for me, and we're all trying to take as many calls to help people as possible. So yeah, our team is growing. It's actually even bigger than this slide. As I mentioned, I started the law firm 9 years ago. This year, I've been really excited to hire really top immigration attorneys from big immigration law firms who've served a variety of like FANG top tech clients, both in, normal immigration like H-1Bs and L-1s, but we do a ton of EB-1A work right now, O-1s, EB-2 NIWs to get your first priority date. So I'll be talking a little bit about that today, but the primary focus is the H-1B and these H-1B concepts for startups. Okay. So yeah, as I mentioned, there are a lot of immigration options for entrepreneurs, for aspiring founders, for serial startup founders. Here's a really big misconception. You do not need a green card to start a company. Many of our clients have become startup founders and entrepreneurs, even as international students, well before they ever got a priority date, and they have successfully navigated their way to a green card. And in some senses, if you have that creative spark and that desire to create something that hasn't been created before, as long as we can get you a work visa, like one of the ones on this page, O-1A is very common. E-2 works if you already have capital and you have certain country of citizenship. H-1B is what this webinar is about today. But L1s can work for startups. There's international entrepreneur parole. There's E3s for Australians, B1s for business visitors, TNs for people from Mexico and Canada. There are lots and lots and lots of options. We use them all the time. I'm having a lot of EB-1A consultations this year because a lot of our clients are technologists in the San Francisco Bay Area from India or China who have been on H-1Bs for many, many, many years. They have a priority date, maybe even from like 2015 or something in EB-2 through their big tech employer. And they really wish they could be a startup founder. And, often they're product managers or cybersecurity experts, or they're like building these insane chips that we have these days for AI or robots or so many cool things. And people put this like self-limiting belief system on themselves, which is, well, I can't have a startup till I get a green card. And like if you're married and your spouse is on H-4 and they have a work permit, an EAD through your H-1B, yeah, I get it. If their work authorization is dependent on you maintaining an H-4 and you don't want to switch to like an O-1, for example, but you don't have to wait for a green card. You can actually transfer an H-1B to your startup. So we're going to be talking about that today. Oh my gosh. Okay. The chat window blew up. The slides are not changing. Thank you, everybody, so much. And lots of questions in the Q&A panel. Okay, let's try this again. Thank you so much. So here we go. So I'm going to start at the beginning. There's my title slide. Oh my gosh. Thanks, everybody. If somebody sees if I'm changing my slides, if you could just send me one message in the chat window. That's my bio slide. Okay, great. We're working. Thank you so much. Everybody can see it now. Okay, great. Thank you. I'll try to pay more attention to the messages. I was like, wow, everybody has so many questions. Let me get to my H-1B stuff first. I have so many materials. Okay. That was hilarious. Thank you so much. Yeah, so this is my team. We're growing. I hired a man. It was very exciting. I actually hired more men than that. It's very exciting trying to build diversity in my team. Yay. Many options for founders. Great. Okay, so here's a new slide that I didn't show yet. So H-1B is super relevant for startup founders. So why? You can work, it is possible for you to work legally in the United States for your own startup. I've done this multiple times. We've done this for people who own 100% of their companies. H-1B is an amazing pathway to grow and establish your very own startup. It has straightforward eligibility criteria, which are wonderful. It's objective, not subjective, like an O-1. It allows for dual intent very clearly. You can have an approved I-140 and get your H-1B, and it's no big deal. And there's no like weird loopholes that we have to rely on, like in the world of an O1 or an E2, for example. Your spouse, if they have an H-4 EAD, they can continue to work legally because you're not changing your status to like an O where the spouse of the main person can't work. So it's wonderful if your spouse is on an H-4 EAD. I've even had some crazy combinations where like the spouse on H-4 EAD started the company, and now we're going to transfer the H-1B holder, husband to go work for the company owned by the wife. So even things like that have worked. So the H-1B is an amazing bridge for you to go from your day job to your startup. It can work. And the other beautiful thing about it is premium processing exists. It's easy. It's 15 days. It's very consistent. And so depending on when you want to leave your current company, there's so many ways to put different H-1Bs together to allow you to move forward. So some of the basics about H-1Bs, and many of you will know this already because you might have had an H-1B for 10 years already. So the purpose of an H-1B is for specialty occupations. So it's basically like the work visa for professionals. And as you probably all know, there's more demand than supply. So there's this annual lottery. You typically get an H-1B in 3-year increments. You're supposed to only have it be valid for 6 years. But if you reach certain milestones of the perm process or getting an I-140 approved, you can either get 1-year or 3-year extensions based on this law AC-21. So you can keep renewing your H-1Bs until you're at the front of the green card line, and you can adjust your status and get a green card. Now, to qualify, there's kind of like, it's like my dad was an immigration lawyer, and he explained it to me with this metaphor of a 3-legged stool. You need all 3 legs or else you're going to topple over when you try to sit down. So one of them is there has to be a company that's legit and real and has money and can pay the prevailing wage. The next is the company has to be offering a job that's real and requires at least a bachelor's degree or equivalent. And the third leg of the 3-legged stool is the candidate has to have the required background and education or experience to be able to qualify to do the job. And with that, the company can sponsor the H-1B work visa for the beneficiary. I mentioned this, so this annual lottery, if you don't have an H-1B yet, because I'm not going to assume that everybody on this webinar has an H-1B yet. So if you still need your first H-1B, and there's a lot of people who might, and that's okay. The lottery now happens basically every March/April, right on the cusp of the months. Now it's online. There's 65,000 regular H-1Bs a year, plus a set aside of 20,000 for people in the US, who received advanced degrees from a US college or university. Has to be accredited. And there's always this random selection process if the applications exceed the cap, the number of allotted H-1Bs, and then you can always file in summer if you get selected. There can be multiple lotteries, and usually October 1st is the very first start date that people would pick. So we might talk a little bit about cap exempt H-1Bs right now, but I think this is a good time to mention it. Let's say you're in college and you've never gotten an H-1B before, but you know you want to be a startup founder, and or maybe your STEM OPT is about to run out, for example. If for whatever reason you haven't you haven't been accepted through this random H-1B selection process first, everything we talk about today in terms of H-1Bs for founders at startups equally applies whether you got your H-1B through the lottery normally, either at your startup for the first time or at a prior company and you want to transfer it, or if you have a cap exempt H-1B. And cap exempt H-1Bs are often at universities, like for teaching assistants, part-time or full-time, or they are at nonprofits affiliated with universities, which can be part-time or full-time. And another really important concept is you can have more than one H-1B at a time. So you can have concurrent H-1Bs. So you can mix and match H-1Bs in all sorts of ways. So some of the first things to think about as you consider becoming an entrepreneur and thinking about like, hey, do I want to transfer my H-1B to my startup? So the company, as I said, has to be legit. The company has to meet several requirements. So often we see very, very early stage startups coming to us at Alcorn Immigration Law. And not all of our clients are startups. You don't have to be a startup to get an H-1B. You can be a normal company. You could be a small LLC. Most of the startups, for various reasons in the venture capital industry, tend to be Delaware C corporations. And if you're doing business, you would probably have to, talk to a business attorney, but beyond the incorporation, getting the tax ID number and opening a bank account. If you meet other parameters, you might have to register your company to do business in the state in any states you're operating in. Like we see a lot of Delaware C corporations registered to do business with the California Secretary of State as a foreign corporation. So there's like a lot of initial setup that needs to happen that a corporate attorney would help you with. People often use online services to incorporate their startups like Stripe Atlas or Clerky. In recent months, I have been learning that some of those systems have outdated materials, and there's a lot of cleanup work that lawyers might do to fix it. So now I'm seeing the light that although those are, cheap and efficient, and you might be better off just hiring an attorney from the get-go. And if you need a corporate attorney, we know several, and you can email us a little bit more about what you need, because, like if you have like a consulting business in San Jose versus an AI startup in Palo Alto or San Francisco, those are like very different business genetics that might need different sorts of setups to help you beyond immigration law. Okay. So some of the reasons why this webinar today has really high attendance, which is very exciting. Thank you all for being here with me today. But one of the reasons why is because for so many years, for at least the 9 years since I started Alcorn Immigration Law, people were very concerned about how to get an H-1B for their startup. And so in the 2015, 2016 range, when I first started taking these types of cases, there were a lot of Trump era requests for evidence for H-1Bs for computer programmers, for specialty occupations, and for the employer-employee relationship prong of H-1Bs, where the person was supposed to go work at an IT consulting company as like a third-party offsite vendor of services to a big tech company. So there was a lot of scrutiny in the world of H-1B law at that time, which raised a whole host of issues like, does this IT consulting company have a valid employer-employee relationship with the beneficiary that they're trying to sponsor for the H-1B? And at that time, there was this whole host of details that said that, under English common law, because American law is based on merry old England, right? And the Magna Carta and all of that with case law. So it said, under common law, to prove a valid employer-employee relationship, you would have to basically have ownership and control such that somebody else could be in charge of your work and that you were serving them essentially as the employee. And so as lawyers, as we sort of ran that language through the startup ecosystem with the goal of making H-1Bs possible for startup founders at that time, the best way to do it was, oh, you're a startup founder? Well, you better dilute yourself now. You should get a 3-member board. One of those people should be an American who's going to sign your paperwork. And you need to have less than 50% of that company so that you can be outvoted by your board now. And it was a really tough nut to swallow for early stage founders. It was very challenging. I know at least, one person who did that and now has a green card through an EB-1A, and they're a serial founder, but that company, right, where they should have had an exit for probably at least 50 or $100 million, right? Like that relationship soured. And the person, sure, they got their green card, they learned a lot of lessons, but they didn't get their financial exit from that company because of these immigration limitations that we were following at the time. So very, very restrictive. So the really exciting thing is over the last few years, USCIS has changed its approach through the IT Serve litigation, which applied to the consulting companies. And that adopted a modern corporate law approach to interpreting the employer-employee relationship in the world of H-1B law. And since then, that guidance has trickled up onto the USCIS website for H-1Bs for entrepreneurs. It made its way into the preamble of the H-1B Modernization Rule, which was proposed in 2023 December, and which changed the way we did the last lottery, but not all of the changes are in effect yet. But that preamble was not a proposed regulation. That was a restatement of the law as it currently is. And it said, it is possible for owner beneficiaries to get H-1Bs approved. And so there might be more changes coming with respect to H-1Bs for founders if those proposed regulations go out for a notice and comment period under the rulemaking process. But right now, as it stands, we've been able to use all of this new guidance over the last year or two to have several successful approvals for H-1Bs for owners who have more than 50% ownership of their company, who are going to be the CEO. And when I started my law firm in 2015, I had no idea that would be possible. It seemed like a pipe dream. But slowly, incrementally, with the support of many brave clients over the years, and we've been tinkering away, chipping away at this, we have a successful formula now that works. So the current framework for the employer-employee relationship, because that's how my professor, I think her name was Laura, somebody in law school, wrote ER is employer, EE is employee for my employment law class. So the USCIS website yesterday, I copied and pasted this. You basically just choose one to prove the employer-employee relationship. So the company has to be able to hire or pay or fire or supervise or otherwise control the work of the beneficiary. So the website for entrepreneurs says from USCIS, the sole or majority owner of the petitioning company or organization may be able to establish a valid employer-employee relationship if the facts show that the petitioning entity meets at least one of the above listed factors. So this is very loose and very generous. And indeed, simply being on payroll and having another person who's authorized to sign immigration documents for your company has been a formula for our success, where we've been very transparent that our clients are owners of their H-1B companies and they get approved. So in general, how this works, if you want to do an H-1B through the lottery, or if you want to do a cap exempt H-1B to get a new H-1B for your company at any time of year, even if you've never been selected in the lottery before, or if you want to transfer your existing lottery from another employer to your future company, or if you have a day job and you want to have a part-time job with a concurrent H-1B at your startup, many paths up the mountain. But in general, we start with a labor condition application for the company, which is like complying with all the labor notices that the government requires. Then we go through Form I-129 and all of the H supplements, which is the actual paperwork. We need supporting documentation about the validity of the company. That can be, proof of your address, if you have a co-working space, proof of the incorporation, who's on the cap table, marketing documents, pitch deck, website, product information. There's a variety of things to show that you have a real company and a real job. And then you have the option for premium processing. Okay, I'm just going to pause here for 1 second, a little bit more to share. And I see there's a lot of questions, and that's awesome. And I'm going to try to get through my slides pretty quickly here so that we can just focus on questions for most of the rest of the hour, because I think that's the most important thing here. I did just want to briefly mention, like, if you are going to get an H-1B at a startup, the employer is responsible for paying you. You need regular paychecks. You need to make sure your W-2s match up at the end of the year with what the stated wage was going to be in the H-1B. If the company's address changes, if your address as the beneficiary changes, if the H-1B employment ends early, these are all obligations that the company has to notify USCIS. But it's all possible. Visa stamping, of course, is another consideration. A lot of you have already dealt with that at various times. I will say there was a pilot program with the State Department this year, where they let like 40,000 people apply for H-1Bs by mailing in their passports while they were still in the United States. No clear results from that have been published, and the hope was that they would roll this program out for all H-1Bs, all O-1s, all L-1s by the end of this year, but there have not, sadly, been any updates. Okay, and then dependents, of course, as you probably all know, your spouse and your children can get H-4 visas, and then let's say, sometimes some of our clients on H-1B have never had a perm approved, and that's more so in the last 2-3 years since COVID for recent graduates of bachelor's and master's programs where the company had a bunch of layoffs or discontinued their perm program, so the person doesn't have a priority date. So in that situation, we're doing EB-2 NIW, I-140 self-petition green cards for people without the perm process. And the national interest argument can be based upon your business plan for your startup, and then that can unlock the H-4 EAD for your spouse. Okay, now the company itself, as the employer, the company has to be compliant with H-1B regulations as well. There is a requirement to maintain something called a public access file that has to be available for inspection to the public, which has the labor condition application and various posting notices and other details about the job and the company that go into the H-1B process. And there can be site visits and audits. I have not heard of any site visits since like 2017, but it is possible, and a new presidential administration could put more emphasis into that again. Fortunately, my 2017 clients listened to me, and they actually had the public access file at the receptionist desk of their office. And so somebody from Department of Labor or USCIS came and talked to the receptionist and wanted to see the public access file and wanted to know if the company was really there, and they had all the correct materials in the right place at the right time. And they passed, and the H-1B was approved, and that was wonderful. But just keep in mind, there are requirements like that. Working from home is easier now, but it is helpful if the company has an address that is not just somebody's home, like when you incorporate. So things to just keep in mind as you go through this process. And we talked about the employer-employee relationship. We got to make sure that the job you're going to do requires a bachelor's degree or higher, so that it's a specialty occupation. We have to calculate the proper wages. You can have an H-1B for part-time work or full-time work. And it can be salaried or hourly, and it can be a fixed amount or it can be a range. So there's a lot of variables to work with when deciding how much the company can invest into your salary. You actually have to get paid the right amount. You can only work for employers that have H-1B petitions approved for you, no outside work. Need accurate records. If the job changes, you have to amend things, and you might have to renew it. There are alternative visas. I've mentioned these. We can talk more about them in the Q&A if you have those questions, like O-1s, E-2s, L-1s. International Entrepreneur Parole, now popular, requires post-inflation adjustment on October 1st will start requiring 311K of funding from US angels or VCs, or 125K of grants from US government agencies at the federal, state, or local levels. But partial evidence of those requirements also can work. So if you don't need an H-1B, if you don't want to have to pay yourself the prevailing wage, and you have some amount of funding, IER is a good option to consider now as well. Okay. You can go from F1 OPT to an H-1B. You can go from J1 to an H-1B. We talked about that. If you don't want to, if the timing doesn't work out with the lottery, you can get a cap exempt H-1B. And for all of these, oh my God, I'm sorry. I'm just a bit under the weather today, but for all of these, you can self-petition EB-1A, EB-2 NIW, I-140. Those are the fastest pathways up the green card mountain. You can reuse a priority date from another H-1B. We're not going to put a founder through PERM because your ownership percentage isn't going to cut it for the PERM process and PERM audits. But that's okay because EB-1A for extraordinary ability and EB-2 NIW are perfect. And if you need a priority date and you're from India and you're not extraordinary enough yet to get EB-1A, totally fine. We can start you with an EB-2 NIW, and then you can always upgrade to an EB-1A later. And if you are from a country that isn't India or China, and you want to go for the easier option, which is the EB-2 NIW, just know that probably your green card is going to take about 3 years with adjustment of status now, because you might have to wait about a year in between the I-140 and when your priority date is current, and you can file the I-485. Just some recent examples. You know, we got a part-time concurrent H-1B approved for 100% owner. That was exciting. We got we transferred somebody's H-1B from a company just completely to their startup, and they owned 100% of the startup. That got approved. We've used these arguments for STEM OPT. We just got it approved for somebody with 74% of their company, and many more examples. So this is something we're doing regularly now. Our website has a lot of resources. The USCIS website has a lot of resources. And then if you want to contact us, just a preview of what's to come, you'll get our questionnaire. You got to click some boxes so we know a little bit about you. Try to click as many as you can, because that'll help. Because like what we're doing on those calls is not just like telling you our price for an H-1B or whatever. We're like, okay, what are your goals? How are we going to get you there? What's the best strategy? How do we factor in your company goals, your family goals, your travel needs, your fundraising goals? Okay, let's work backwards. How are we going to get you your green card? How are we going to get your visa now? What do we need to do to qualify? So we're putting together like a whole multifaceted strategy, which is how we help our clients. Okay, so now we're going to go to the Q&A. I wrote a book. It's on Amazon. I recorded an audiobook. It's available on Audible. I should get it onto Apple soon, but it's on Amazon right now. So you're welcome to check that out. And then we're always there for you at my law firm. And you can email us hello@alcorn.law. But if you want a consultation, the fastest way is through our website at www.alcorn.law. And we are going to be sharing all of these slides with everybody as a follow-up. Okay, so now I'm going to get my Q&A panel open. And I'm going to go through the Q&A panel first, and then we're going to go through the webinar chat. So if you put your question in the chat, try to get it in the Q&A panel. I'm going to go through those in order, and then I'm going to look to see if anything is remaining in the chat, and I'll just try to answer as many as I can, and I hope this is helpful. Okay, first one, many. I registered a company. Currently, I'm working full-time. I wanted to know if I can legally run the company and work for that company. So I'm going to assume you're on H-1B, and I'm going to assume that your H-1B is for your full-time employer, which is different from the company that you registered. So right now, today, if you do nothing, you cannot simply start working at your startup that you registered. But if you get an H-1B for the company that you registered, then you can work there. So you should either consider a part-time concurrent H-1B. so that you would keep your day job and you would add a second H-1B to work for like 5 or 10 hours a week. Now, if you do that, you ought to consult with an IP attorney and an employment attorney before you start working at the new company. Because if there's overlap or you've used company time or materials or Wi-Fi or laptop to create your IP for your new startup, your current employer might lay claim to that IP. If you were an American and you want to be a startup founder, you would have like a 6-month sabbatical in between your last job and your new startup, and you would like magically come up with an idea on a weekend and like launch it, and that would be great. But immigrants don't have that luxury. So if you know that it's going to be like a venture backable startup concept, the safest thing here would be like start the H-1B now, not as a concurrent H-1B, but for full-time or part-time work at the startup in the future. Choose a future start date. File it now with premium processing. When it gets approved, you have enough time to give your current employer notice, and then you can have time to wrap up your current job, have a little bit of a break, and then start at the intended day at your new startup. And you will have to show that you have, normally when we're preparing an H-1B for filing, we want to show, I have determined that the best practice in my experience is to have evidence on hand of ability to pay in case of a request for evidence. I like having bank statements from the company that show a bank balance of cash prior to the date we file the H-1B. This is not required for an H-1B, but if there is a request for evidence saying, hey, show us pre-existing evidence that you have enough money to pay the prevailing wage, I like to have those bank statements on hand. People always want to know what's the minimum amount of money. And like, yeah, some people have very out of whack expectations. They're like, we only raised $1 million. How will we ever qualify? I'm like, oh, honey, you're fine. Other people, like we have gotten H-1Bs approved with like 200,000 in the bank, 100,000 in the bank, 60,000 in the bank. I even got an H-1B approved once. I don't recommend this, but I even got it approved with like $8,742.53 in the bank account. And the way I got it approved, because there was this RFE and it was like, how much money do you have? How are you going to pay these guys, like the founding engineers, salary for 3 years at this rate? And I was like, oh my God, we have $8,000. How are you going to do this? And the founder was like, well, it's an enterprise SaaS software, and look at all these letters of intent that we have and design partners. And as soon as we get this guy approved, he can build the product and we can sell it. So there was actually a way, and we got that H-1B approved. It was approved for 1 year instead of 3 years, but then we were able to get the typical 3-year extensions. So that's another important factor to keep in mind. Okay, next question. Can you register the company and be the officer of the company on an H-1B? When registering the company, we need to put a name for that. Is there any risks? My other co-founders are on F1. Okay, so like in an ideal world where there were unicorns and rainbows and you trusted everybody and everything was great, yeah, it would be fabulous if like there was a co-founder that had work authorization who could incorporate the company and give everybody offer letters contingent on immigration being approved, and then they would be the signatory. But the reality is that not everybody, has somebody like that in their company. And we have filed many successful cases where the person getting the H-1B is the person who incorporated the company and who is listed as the CEO on the paperwork. Would I recommend putting yourself out on social media as the CEO before the H-1B is approved? Absolutely not. But this is where like having a consultation with us where we can actually talk about like the composition of your company. Are there like 3 of you? For the ones on F1, do they have OPT or STEM OPT? Oftentimes somebody on OPT is the one to incorporate. That can work. So there's just a lot of variables, but happy to help you work through that in a consultation. Next person wants to know, I'm considering to move to an O1. How fast is it to transition from an H-1B to an O1? Well, if you would like to hire Alcorn, we have 3 months to prepare and file an O1 petition based on our service level agreement with our clients, starting from the date that we are hired. So we do a consultation, we talk about the right, actual solution for you. If you'd like to hire us, we send you a legal agreement, you sign it, we send you an invoice, you pay us, we open your case, that starts our 12-week clock. In the first 6 weeks, what we're trying to do is help you get us all of your documents. That includes the letters of recommendation. We do our recommender snapshot to help determine who the 4 to 6 letters of recommendation should be signed by. And then in our standard service level, you generate first drafts and we edit them up to our level. We have a white glove offering for $500 more. We'll just write the letters of recommendation for you from start to finish. You go get those signed. Once we have all the signed letters and all the evidence, then we start putting the petition together. And the goal is to file within 12 weeks from when we start. And then USCIS has premium processing, which is 15 days for an O1. Now, the H-1B process is a lot simpler. It takes us 6 weeks to prepare and file an H-1B. But we need the company to be incorporated first. We can try to, I've done it in crazy situations where they're like, there's about to be $10 million and we have to do this immediately. And da, 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 da. So it's a different startup climate than that right now with funding because the ZIRP era ended with 0 interest rates. But anyway, 6 weeks is pretty typical to do a solid job on an H-1B from hiring us to filing. And it's helpful if you can incorporate first, get your tax ID number called an EIN, the employer identification number from the IRS, open a bank account. Those are, and we also recommend for an H-1B getting your company registered in Dun & Bradstreet, which is kind of annoying. It's like a private company. If you charge $300, you can get in there real quick. If you pay them $300. But the reason why we care about that is because USCIS uses the Dun & Bradstreet database for verifying that something is a real business for H-1Bs. They don't typically do that for O1s or other case types, but I've seen those RFEs for H-1Bs. Somebody wants to know, can I open an LLC with 100% ownership and transfer the H-1B to my new LLC? Yes, that is theoretically possible. If you would like to do that, you should talk to us before you open your LLC, just to make sure that you're going to have enough money to pay your salary and think through some of the various aspects we've talked about. But yes, theoretically, it's possible. I want to start an LLC to manage my personal and rental properties. Can I open an LLC while on an H-1B visa? I've read that you can't actively work on it or make decisions. What exactly does that mean? How can I open an LLC for real estate or any business while on an H-1B? Well, anybody... So American law is convoluted and a little bit contradictory, but anybody can own a company here. You don't have to live here. You don't have to, you could live somewhere else. You can own an asset. A company is just an asset, but what you're not allowed to do is work there if you're on US soil and you don't have work authorization. So if you just had like a company that just sat there and owned your property assets, and maybe since we're talking about like rental properties, maybe you have like a property management company that gets hired by your LLC to like run the ins and outs of like renting out the property and maintaining it, like you're okay to just own that. But what you can't do is like, paint the walls and turn it into an Airbnb and write the listings and, chat with the people who are trying to book it for the weekend. So the distinction has to do with the definition of work under US employment law. And basically any services in hope of future pay equals work. So as long as you're not the one like serving this business, you're just like owning it as an asset, you should be okay. That's kind of how that concept works. Okay. So many great questions. Oh my gosh. I don't know if I'm going to be able to answer all these. Hang on, let me see. What time is it? I'm doing another webinar in a little bit, but it's okay, I have some extra time. So I'll try to answer all these as soon as I can though. Okay, buying an existing business. Can I move my H-1B to that company? Maybe yes. What if the approved H-1B and I-140 does not directly relate to the business nature? Well, then you should definitely talk to us before you buy the business. Example, EB-2 NIW approved for contributing to public safety as a process engineer. Congratulations. Can I transfer my process engineer H-1B to a new business that I want to buy? Yes, if it needs a process engineer. How would you do this? I would think about all the roles that this new company needs. I would look at your bachelor's degree and your work experience, and I would see if you are qualified for other H-1B specialty occupations that fill a business need. There is no need for you to stay a process engineer, and maybe we can link the company you want to acquire to having something to do with public safety in the future. But this is one where a consultation where we can look at your H-1Bs as well as your EB-2 NIW would be helpful. Okay, next one. Somebody is from India. They've spent 20 years in fintech. Their green card process is underway through an I-140 with perm. They took a career break to go to the best music school at Berkeley. Congratulations. They want to combine their tech and finance experience with music to launch a startup primarily focusing on music production, publishing, and AI-driven online platform. That's fantastic. What would be the best possible way to move forward? Oh my God, so exciting. Yeah, I mean, you should think about like what the business needs. Does it need funding? Does it need co-founders? Can you do this all by yourself? Once you have an idea of like the business plan, we can work backwards from there to reverse engineer an immigration plan that will work. And it will probably involve doing an H-1B transfer for you. And hopefully you have a previous priority date from another employer. So it doesn't matter if you abandon the current I-140 perm process. But if you need a priority date still, then we could probably look at like an EB-2 NIW based on AI and music, and that should probably get approved. I've gotten EB-2 NIWs approved for like a person who did like music festivals. So there's a lot of things that count as national interest. I'm on an H-1B. I started my company 1.5 years ago. I got my extension approved this month. That's great, but I haven't done much sales yet. I was looking for an option to move my visa on my startup. What are my options and how much funds are needed? Can I move on any other status like L1? I don't have much funds like $300,000. Well, pre-revenue startups can get H-1Bs approved. You do not have to have sales in the startup. You can have runway with like money in the bank. I've even seen, you know, people get friends and family, angel investments. You can make personal loans to the business. There's a lot of creative ways to get that initial funding. And L1 in particular requires working 1 year abroad. So that probably isn't going to make the most sense, but we should talk about it because there's probably a creative solution. How do I sponsor an H-1B for my startup co-founder from abroad, a new startup formed in the US with ownership as an international partner? That's awesome. You're probably going to want to reach out to us soon to talk about the H-1B lottery for March of 2025. It's 2025 almost. Oh my God. But even if your co-founder gets selected, they won't be able to move here until October 1st. So I would highly encourage you to also consider a CAP exempt concurrent H-1B with something like the Build Fellowship from Open Avenues or the Parachute Project. There are these new nonprofit services that are coming up that have the option to help somebody work at a university or a university affiliated nonprofit for like 5 hours a week, get your first H-1B, and then you can get your second concurrent H-1B any time of year. Okay, those do take a little bit more funding because those services have like a monthly fee of you know, like, I don't know, $2,000 to $4,000 a month, I think. So you have to have the ability to pay that, but they do work, and we've done it for many urgent and important hires and like YC founders and people who had to get here immediately and be able to work instantly. Under the H-1B before, now I'm going to have F1, could I still have the C Corp, which I'm CEO and founder of and raising capital for? Once raised capital, I will switch my H-1B to my own startup. Is there any issue if I do this? Any key points I need to pay attention to? I would look carefully at the presidential election, because F1s are pretty generous right now, where you can get an F1 approved by the State Department in your home country if you have the intention to depart after this trip. But under the prior Trump administration, they were not that friendly. So theoretically, you wouldn't have a non-immigrant intent issue if it's like a Harris administration. But that's something to look at. If you do all of this through a change of status without going abroad, then you wouldn't really face that issue. The key thing is to not work at the company when you're on F1 status, but you are allowed to go to school when you're on H-1B status. So you could also consider just staying on H-1B depending on the timing. If I got the H-1B lottery previously, but my current H-1B is cap exempt, can I apply for a concurrent H-1B that's not cap exempt without going through the lottery again? Yeah, as long as you use less than 6 years on the original H-1B through the lottery. How long does it take to go through the process of forming an LLC to get an H-1B? I mean, you can like go on to LegalZoom.com and create an LLC in like a couple days, but if you have partners and you need various types of agreements and you need to like think through the details, that's where having a lawyer would be really great. They would probably charge you a couple $1,000s and it could probably be done in a few weeks. So that would be advisable, I think. If I'm working on a fun-time job, I don't know what that is, but I like it. I'm working part-time on my concurrent H-1B. What's the least number of work hours on the part-time job do I need to show to maintain valid status? The lowest, it's like limbo. It's like, how low can you go? The lowest amount of H-1B hours that we have tried is 5 hours a week. If you would like to try less with us and want to roll that dice, happy to experiment with even less. But we've typically done 5 hours a week as our lowest. Can you use a previously approved H-1B I-797 that remains unused and has expired? Do I still have that slot? Yes, you do. I have done that for a handful of people. It has worked. It's a little bit tricky, but it can be done. We've gotten people like their old H-1Bs that they never activated and gotten it approved for another company now. Can you please talk about concurrent H-1B and how that works with a full-time H-1B? Are there any disadvantages of the concurrent H-1B? Yeah, I mean, the IP and employment law considerations are important, unless your company is like completely different from your unless your startup is completely different from your day job. The other disadvantage is your employer finds out and then they get mad at you and then you could get fired. But you know, it just depends. People are like, well, when do I have to disclose it to my current employer? And the answer is you don't, except when you do like a perm or an I-140, or they're going to extend your I-485, or they're going to extend your H-1B, then their immigration attorneys are going to want all of your past approvals, right? And so you should disclose it at that time. Can all board members for a new LLC be non-US citizens living outside India? I'm going to say, or maybe you're asking if they can be in India. Yeah, there's no requirement that the company is owned by Americans. Oh, in the USA. Okay, yeah, thanks. The following conversation, what? Are you programming me like an AI? What is this? Okay, somebody put their like chat GPT prompt in the Q&A panel. I'm just going to dismiss that one, but if that was a real question, feel free to ask it again. Okay, next. Can a company that's sponsoring the founder be pre-revenue? Yes. The company theoretically won't be able to do prevailing wage, so would that disqualify the applicant? Yes. So you can be pre-revenue, but you have to be able to pay the prevailing wage. But remember, the company gets to decide how many hours, is it part-time or full-time? Is there a range of hours? What is the job? What is the level? There's a lot of flexibility in this, so at least have a consultation and we can try to help you figure out a ballpark of what the wage will be. We don't do like the full research till you've hired us, but we can at least help you figure out if it's like a go, no go situation. Okay. Oh, somebody apologized for the other thing. It's totally fine. All right. This person has an H-1B and an EB-1A, and their wife has an H-4 EAD, and they have a C Corp in Delaware as 50-50 partners. The person is on H-1B and aware that they need to have a passive role in the business. Their wife is going to be actively involved. They want to know whether it's okay to open a business bank account under their name and if there could be any potential impact on their visa. The likelihood is extremely low. If it's possible for your wife to do it in her name, that would be slightly better, but I have never seen that being an issue in my experience. All right, it looks like there's some other stuff I'm gonna just miss. Okay. I'm currently on H-1B and have a pending NIW application. If I get the priority date, can I take both the H-1B and the NIW with me to the startup? Yes. What does the process look like? It's two very different processes. The H-1B is a transfer from one company to your startup. The NIW is your priority date. So it depends on if the NIW was a self-petition or if it was employer petitioned. If it was self-petitioned, we want to make sure that like your national interest work is still related to what your startup's going to be doing in the future and you don't need to do anything else. But if it was petitioned for by the company, then we might need to refile the NIW as a self-petition instead of an employer petition, and then we can tailor it more towards what your startup's going to do. And also the way I do EB-1As or EB-2 NIWs or O-1As is like, we realize that startups might not work out. So we're trying to help our clients have the flexibility to live here and try a lot of different startups, and where it's okay to fail, right? And your immigration status isn't dependent on it. So we try to craft things broadly to give you the most creative freedom within your field of work. What's the expectation of the minimum salary for a founder at a high ownership startup for the IER or an O-1 visa? There's no required salary for IER or O-1A. We've typically seen like $60,000 in the San Francisco Bay Area be like the bare minimum that people try. Like if they're living in a hacker home on a bunk bed and eating ramen, that seems to be able to work, and some people are able to do that. Somebody is on a J1 and their supervisor wants to sponsor a university H-1B. Can they register an LLC with their cap-exempt H-1B and work actively for it without withdrawing any salary? No. Do you still need a 3-member board with US citizens? No. But you probably need a cap-exempt concurrent part-time H-1B to work at your startup. My H-1B of 6 years is ending this month, but I do own 50%, or I do own 50 rental properties here in the US. Is there a way to a green card if I want to create a company in that field? Maybe. We'd probably have to look at EB-2 NIW initially, and maybe EB-1A, but we'd have to show like why what you do with rental properties is special for America. Are you creating jobs? Do you have a new proprietary technology? Do you use AI for rental properties? Or like why you're really good at rental properties and you're like famous for it and a thought leader and you've like written about it and people have interviewed you about it, that sort of thing. But it is possible. For a Canadian citizen who's in STEM, a solo founder with 1 board member, which has a better chance to obtain the TN or the E2 or the H-1B? Don't do a TN. TNs have very different ownership rules, completely different from H-1B. It's not going to work. You could probably do an E2 or an H-1B. The E2, you have to do more prep work and invest the money in the US first, and then go apply in Canada at the consulate, which takes several months. So it's a slower process. The H-1B might be overall more expensive to get a cap exempt H-1B, but it's faster and it's more predictable. Can an entity authorized to sign immigration documents for the founder be legal counsel, or does it need to be another full-time employee? We don't sign these papers for our clients, but One creative solution that some of our clients have chosen to use is hire a human resources employee or a human resources fractional consultant who's empowered to do all the HR work at the company, and immigration forms can be part of their duties. I want to start an LLC to manage my personal and rental properties. I think we took care of that one already. If I'm currently on H-1B and want to work for my startup on H-1B and keep my primary job, I would be contracted out from my startup to work for another company. Therefore, company C is paying my startup salary. Is this sufficient to prove that the startup is able to pay my prevailing wage? Maybe, but that's like a super complicated consulting H-1B question. So I would encourage you to have a consultation with us. If we want to transfer the H-1B to startup while the renewal application of the current H-1B is still pending approval and the current H-1B is getting expired in 20 days, will that create a problem for the transfer? Look, it's going to take us 6 weeks to get everything ready for your new H-1B transfer for your startup. So you could contact us now to start, but I wouldn't want to file the next step to move you to the startup until all of this is resolved, just to make sure that you're maintaining status, unless you're definitely quitting that company at a certain point of time. The service process and timeline for NIW is the same as like an O1 or an EB-1A. It's 12 weeks to the time of filing. If somebody is an undocumented US graduate and you want to create a design studio offering 3D design, motion graphics, digital marketing, and video editing, can you get approved for an H-1B? Yes, it's possible. And now there's this special new D3 waiver, and we might actually we might be able to get you documented. So it's, I'm working on this with another client right now. It's a very special situation, but there might be a way for you to actually, like become fully legal through this. So definitely reach out for a consult. Before founding a company and raising money, I'd ideally want to do work with my co-founder to validate that the company was worth starting. However, I'm on an H-1B with my current employer, and I understand that I'm legally only supposed to do paid work for my employer. What activities is one allowed to do to explore a startup idea while still on an H-1B before incorporating fundraising and transferring the H-1B to my startup? I think you can negotiate with people. I think you can do user interviews. I think you can tinker and let people play with prototypes. I don't think you should charge anybody. I don't think you should incorporate during these activities. And you can conduct research essentially. Maybe all of you will want to help me with this, but this other idea I have is like, we should create a nonprofit so that all of your like price testing, we can just funnel any of the payments like into a nonprofit. So you're not making money off of it, but you can see like what people are willing to pay for certain products, because that's one of the issues that my clients have is like, I need to figure out what price to sell this at. I have a wait list of 10,000 users. I would like to start A/B testing this, but I don't want to get the H-1B because, you know, like I got to raise money to get the H-1B, and raising money is contingent on the price validation. So I'm happy to help you think of other options for that as well. I'm on H-1B impacted by tech layoffs after working for 3 months with the current employer. I'm sorry to hear that. Can I go back to my previous employer while my H-1B is still active without refiling? They should have withdrawn your H-1B, but if they didn't do it, you should talk to them about taking you back. If not, they can transfer you back. I'm on a Canadian spousal TD visa with an extensive background in marketing and tech. I'd like to start a company. Should I consider the H-1B or the O-1? What is the cost to work with Alcorn? We charge usually between $6,000 and $12,000 for most of our legal services as a flat fee plus government filing fees. RFEs are separate and flat fee. Definitely have a consultation. We'll evaluate you for an O-1. Since your spouse has a TN and can work based on that, the O-1, if you qualify, might be simpler. Do I need to inform my current or future employer if I want to start an LLC? No, but you might need to inform them if they're doing something else to your immigration status down the road. And if you did like an H-1B through a concurrent part-time job at your startup. Does your occupation in the H-1B have to be in the field you studied in, like OPT? No, it does not. So we've had like English majors get computer science H-1Bs, and that's because we were able to show that they had like previous work experience or coursework, and we can get education and experience evaluations. I recently got approved for my H-1B as of October 1st, and my company is doing layoffs. My perm is expected to be approved this month, according to the DOL. How can I keep my perm date? I'm Canadian, and my green card I-485 is looking like early 2025. If you can try to hang on to your job until October 1st so that your H-1B becomes activated, and if you can convince your employer to still file the I-140 for you and you can pay for premium processing, like you might be even able to pay for the I-140. But if you can possibly get that through as quickly as possible, that would help you keep your priority date. If you want to start a hedge fund, so you have to pay salary, or just the fees from assets under management can be the wage, 2% of invested capital. We have to show, that's a great question. You have to show that you're going to meet the H-1B prevailing wage. So if you already have capital that you're going to be investing, we could try to make that argument, but we might want to give you some base salary that's nominal that meets the H-1B requirements in addition to your 2%. As an H-1B holder looking to create a startup, it's a bit unclear as to what is considered illegally working for the company. I agree. Are the following considered legal? 1, opening a bank account. Should be. 2, creating a website for a company, which is considered okay. What is considered okay for launching the business? Yeah, I mean, the more you can outsource this stuff to other people, the better. Have people done this and have they been fine? Yes. Could it theoretically be a problem one day if somebody noticed and cared? Maybe. We would have good arguments to fight back, but like to the extent you can outsource, that's a way to buy peace of mind. Can you pause your H-1B, leave the country for a year and come back to it? Sort of. There's this thing called recapture. So you're not going to end the final date on your current petition, but you can capture, when you do an extension, you can recapture the time you're outside of the US and get it back from the 6 years. Can you share more details about applying for a part-time H-1B work visa to work for your business and what requirements the business should meet? I'm currently on an employer-sponsored H-1B and particularly interested in starting a consulting business. Yeah, company has to legally exist, tax ID number, bank account, ideally some sort of office or co-working space, like a business address that's consistent across your corporate registered documents and bank account, with no home addresses, Dun and Bradstreet registration, some work lined up, or some like a website that shows your services, like that would be helpful. We have a whole checklist that we give to clients. I have STEM OPT. I started a startup with a 3-member board. The 2 board members are US citizens. I don't have active funding from outside as I'm bootstrapping. Am I allowed to run a company without funding and try to get funding and apply for the H-1B next year? My wife is on H-1B and has EB-1A approved. What are my options? You need to pay if the startup is your STEM OPT employer, it has to pay you minimum wage at least 20 hours a week to comply with STEM regulations, but it doesn't have to raise money to be able to do that. There are other sources of funds that you can utilize, depending on what country you're from and what your wife's priority date is and your wife's country of birth. That will determine your other options for a green card and timing, but that's more of a consultation thing. Any advantage of keeping an H-1B over going for an O-1? No spouse, no family issues. Not really, unless you just want to be in stealth mode. I guess that's the main thing. Look, an O-1 is usually better. Because if you have an O-1, it makes getting an EB-1A green card easier. They give it, they like give deference to a prior O-1 approval in an EB-1A adjudication. And the prevailing wage from an H-1B is annoying. But sometimes people are like, no, I have the money. I just want to be heads down. I don't want to deal with like giving speeches or writing articles or dealing with that fluffy stuff that's required for an O1. So just like, give me my peace of mind, and I'm just going to keep being Tony Stark in my basement. So I guess that would be a situation in which an H-1B would be better. Okay. What's the lowest prevailing wage I need to have my part-time H-1B approved with my company? I'm currently on F1 CPT building it, but it has no revenue. Can we just show the runway? If so, how many years or months of runway do I need to show? Well, runway in the bank account is fine. If we're requesting a 3-year H-1B, then we want to be able to show that one way or another, you have enough money to pay the prevailing wage for the number of hours you want for the number of years that you want the H-1B. So it's just this like math formula that comes together. But like, if you're just going to work 5 hours a week, but then if that's your only H-1B, I don't know if that can get approved. If it's your only H-1B, you might want to do at least 20 hours a week. So do a consultation. I'm a Canadian with an active L1A working on my startup company in California, wondering what's the best pathway to get a green card. Thanks. Well, if your company will sponsor you for an EB-1C with premium processing, that might be best. And you should concurrently file your I-485. And after your I-485 has been pending for 180 days, you can try to do AC-21, same or similar occupation portability. If you want to stick with your company, if you want to quit, then we should explore like cap exempt H-1B and O1 and TN maybe if you have co-founders. While employed full-time at H-1B company, a concurrent part-time H-1B be obtained for a pre-revenue LLC as the sole operator or employee with all board members located outside of California. Could the H-1B petitioner be the majority owner with the board members as minority owners? Yes. Yes, you could have a concurrent part-time H-1B at a pre-revenue LLC for the sole employee with foreign board members, with the petitioner being the majority. Yes, that's possible. If you own 50 properties, should you be really worried about a visa or a green card? Well, you want to probably own them in the US. TNs, sure, I'm happy to talk about that. TNs they have their own definition in either the Foreign Affairs Manual or the Department Customs and Border Protection Manual. They have their own definition of employer-employee relationship. And so for a TN, we really want to show minority equity and another human that's not you who works at the company who's like gonna be supervising you physically signs your papers. So it's a bit different. For someone considering petition, I actually had a crazy TN story this week where like we're trying to get an intern in for like a YC company, and there was like this famous supervisor, and they just like really needed that person's college degree, and the person was like at the airport, and we're like trying to like text this famous person for their degree, and it was very silly, but in the end it all worked out. For someone considering petitioning for a part-time concurrent H-1B and also EB-2 NIW, does it make sense to pursue both? Sure. Would it make more sense to obtain the I-140 from the EB-2 NIW and then use its EAD for the startup? There's a timing issue. The EB-2 NIW is pretty slow. And if Trump's the president, I would not want you to give up your H-1B. I would want you to maintain an H-1B the whole time that you're waiting for your EB-2 NIW and doing the I-485. So just from a practicality sense, you might want to start working on the H-1B. Does my company must have money to sponsor my concurrent H-1B? Yes. If yes, then what is the minimum? We have to show the ability to pay the prevailing wage for the number of hours selected for the duration of the petition. Can I transfer from family and friends and later return to them once received? Yeah, I mean, well, you have to use the money to pay the payroll. Like you have to have pay stubs when you're on an H-1B. So it can be a loan and you can document it and pay it back appropriately over time, but you actually have to pay the H-1B prevailing wage. We do 20-minute consultations at Alcorn. We try to give complimentary consultations where we can. If it doesn't seem like a fit for our law firm services, but we still want to try to be able to help you. We will offer a paid consultation, which is usually about $300. And then if you hire us for something, we will credit that to your case. What are the main disadvantages of IER compared to the O1A or H-1B for founders? For IER, there's no premium processing. It's parole, it's not a visa, and it's a little bit less common. So traveling might be a little more complicated because people at the airport won't be as familiar with what it is. It has a 5-year total limit. It's in 2.5-year increments, whereas the O1 and the H-1B can be 3 years. The O1 is unlimited. The H-1B has 6 years. And it's just a little bit newer. And since there's no premium processing, it could take several months to get approved, but they're trying to approve them as quickly as possible. For the ATN or the H-1B, can we define salary with equity? No, it has to be like actual, like normal human, the way normal people make money working in companies. Can a non-US LLC or a trust own the US LLC, which can sponsor me an H-1B? So is there a much more clear division on paper of employer relationship? Yeah, we can talk about that theoretically. Okay, we talked about Canada. I'm going to try to wrap this up here. Somebody has portability. If you want to do portability for a consulting business, we should do a consultation first because it has to be a same or similar job to your prior job that you got the I-140 for, and the consulting business might not qualify as that. So you want to be cautious about doing that. Which is the easiest path to a green card, EB-1A, EB-2 NIW, or O1A? Well, probably getting an O1 first and then getting an EB-1 is the simplest and clearest and shortest if you qualify, but it can be harder to qualify. Is EB-1A becoming popular because it's easier to get than all the other options? I wish. It's the most challenging to get. It's also called the Einstein visa, but you really don't have to be that smart. You just have to work hard and you have to show like a track record of success. The reason it's becoming popular is because that the wait times are so long for people born in India. EB-2 NIW also has a long wait time for people from India and China, and it's the same line as the EB-2 with perm. It's just the EB-2 line on the visa bulletin. Is it better to just incorporate an LLC in a non-US country and not worry about getting a concurrent H-1B? Does an H-1B prohibit working for non-US companies? Yeah, I mean, if you're in the US and you're working for a foreign company, that could be a violation of your H-1B status, and it could jeopardize your foreign company. Okay, yeah. Oh my God. We're gonna wrap up here. I didn't get to the webinar chat. I hope everybody who needed something was able to put it in the Q&A panel. I guess I'll be having more of these webinars this fall. You should be on our newsletter to find out. And thank you for the amazing attendance, sticking through here with me till the end, 20 minutes over. That's amazing. And thank you for all the emojis. I'm blushing. In general, I'll close on this note. The presidential election, it will definitely affect it. How, we have no idea. Like, if Trump's the president, will he have the same people do his immigration policy as last time? How much of the border will be a platform? How much will high-skilled immigration get swept up into some like border compromise, if it can even happen? Like, there's a lot more uncertainty. If Harris is the president, it's probably going to be a continuation of like Biden policy, because she had a lot to do with immigration policy under the Biden administration. And the one thing, though, that both Republicans and Democrats have in common is the importance of AI from a national security perspective. So since you guys are probably mostly in tech, like, at least have some assurance that you should be okay because of that. So with that, I will leave you. Thank you all so much. It was a pleasure. I appreciate all the engagement, all the questions. Thank you for helping me keep my slides on track. Have a wonderful day. Stay in touch and hope to see you next time. Bye.